This is just the beginning.
Hello, and welcome to the New Washington, the Future of Green Transportation virtual event. I'm Joanne Muller. I'm the transportation correspondent for Axios, and I'm coming to you from my home in Detroit, Michigan. I'd like to thank Uber for making this conversation possible today. You can follow along on all of our Axios platforms on social media and also at our website, axios.com. On Twitter, we have a hashtag Axios Events, and our handle is @Axios. So today, for the next 30 minutes, we're going to talk about the future of transportation in both the automotive and aviation industries. We're looking at some of the innovations that are going to make those industries more sustainable, more eco-friendly going forward. I'm really happy that our first guest is the CEO of United Airlines, Scott Kirby. Scott, welcome.
Thank you, Joanne. Thanks for having me.
It's great. We're really pleased that you're here and made some time today to talk with us. We have a lot to get to on the topic of green transportation, but Axios, we always lead with news. And so we wanted to ask you a little bit about a recent situation. Many of our Axios viewers probably saw some footage recently of an engine fire on a United flight. And it's interesting because this comes at a time when people are nervous about flying for a variety of reasons. And so I'm wondering if you can talk just, in a big picture way about what you think about people's confidence in flying right now.
Well, first, we're really thankful and grateful that no one was injured with the engine incident on the flight from Denver to Honolulu. And it's a tribute to the professionalism of our crew, who did a really amazing job of getting the airplane safely back on the field with no injuries, taking care of the customers, really across the board. I'm just proud of the United team for how they handled the situation. And at United Airlines, but really across the board here in U.S. aviation, safety is always our number one priority, and our customers can broadly feel confident in that. And that's why, shortly after this incident, out of an abundance of caution, we actually took all of the Pratt & Whitney Power 777s out of service and are not flying them until we complete an investigation and get approval from the FAA, who we're working closely with to identify the causes and anything that we need to do to make sure this doesn't happen again in the future.
That's good. I think that will go a long way to rebuild confidence. But do you have a sense of when the air travel will return to normal?
I have real confidence in the long term. That by this time next year we'll be back to a world where people feel safe traveling again. And while COVID may not be completely in the rearview mirror, that all the safety protocols that we have mean people are back comfortable flying again. Now, I'm not sure if that's going to happen by this summer, or if it's going to be in the fall, or even in the winter. It really depends on the pace of vaccinations, the government response, and importantly, we need to reach a final scientific medical conclusion that once you've been vaccinated, it's safe for you to be out and behaving normally. As long as we're still wearing masks and socially distancing, the business is not going to come back. You aren't going to be able to go to a Broadway play or go to an office tower. And so we need that as well. But that should all happen sometime later this year. I'm not sure the exact timing, but should happen. And then I think there's large pent-up demand for travel once that does happen.
I agree. At least in my household, there is. So let's turn to the topic at hand here, which is the future, right? The future of green transportation. United, aviation in general is a big source of greenhouse gas emissions, and I know this is an important personal issue for you. Tell us what United is doing.
Yeah. United, I think, is leading the world in terms of aviation, but one of the leading companies in the world. And you're right that this is a matter of personal importance to me. I have 7 kids, and I want to leave a better future behind for them. And I'm in a position where I can make a difference on that. And it's true for all of our employees and our customers as well. And really what United is doing is trying to be honest about the scope and scale of the problem and take real action and real solutions. And So we started investing a few years ago in sustainable aviation fuels, and we've got more on that to come. In December of last year, we were honored to be a partner with Occidental and 1.5 in a carbon sequestration project. That is important because the math simply doesn't work for solving global climate change unless we're going to take carbon directly out of the air and pump it underground where it can be permanently stored for millions of years. And then finally, a couple of weeks ago, we were a launch partner with an electric aviation company, Archer Aviation. So we've been honored to be leading the way in all of these areas on sustainability.
Well, let's start to dig into each of those things. Let's talk about carbon sequestration. We've heard about carbon offsets. Tell us the difference between what you're doing and what a carbon offset program would do.
Yeah, so traditional carbon offsets are what almost every company, when they make a carbon commitment, are talking about buying carbon offsets. And essentially, the easiest way to think about it is paying to plant trees. That's what most people do. Some form of either don't cut down a tree or pay to plant an additional tree. And some of those projects, to be honest, aren't really real. They're things that were going to happen anyway. But even if they are, we emit 4,000 times as much carbon as we did in the pre-industrial era. There is simply not room on the planet to plant 4,000 times as many trees. And we have to accept that fact. You know, it's too easy to gloss over the problem by saying, I'm going to write a check to some organization that's going to plant some trees somewhere in the world, and that solves my carbon change problem. That will not do it because we simply can't plant enough trees. And if you're good at math, the only way for this to work out is, at least today, is with direct air capture and sequestration. And that's why it's important that we start investing in it so we can drive the cost of that technology down to be competitive, and because it's going to have to be a huge part of the solution.
Is that enough to offset what flying generates, or are there other solutions you need to do as well?
Well, the great thing about carbon sequestration is it is the only solution that is fully scalable. We're doing a lot with sustainable fuels, for example, but you run into a limit of getting feedstock for sustainable fuels, particularly if you aren't going to take land out of production for food. The great thing about direct air capture and sequestration is you can do as much of it as you need to, not just for aviation, but for all the other carbon emitting industries and all the other human activities that emit carbon. It's the only solution that is completely scalable and can ultimately get us all the way down to zero net carbon every year if we use it. And that's why it's so important that we start talking about it and make the big investments in sequestration.
So you also mentioned electric aircraft. This is a topic that I've been very interested in lately, but it's hard to get electric airplanes in the air, right? Because batteries weigh a lot, and they don't. So therefore, the range isn't very far. Tell me what you see as far as the future of electric aviation.
Yeah, well, the challenge with electric or hydrogen power, by the way, is that there's simply not enough energy density to fly big airplanes a long way. And so nothing that's even on the drawing boards theoretically is going to replace jet fuel for long haul service with a lot of customers on board. But it can be used to replace short haul service. And so what we've invested in with Archer Aviation is an example that, in a lot of ways, it's replacing what are helicopters today. And by the way, I think can be more safe because it's got 12 rotors instead of a single rotor. So there are going to be a lot of opportunities, but they're going to be more confined to the short haul missions with lesser payloads. We're never going to, at least not in the foreseeable future, be flying a 777 from San Francisco to Bangalore, India, with 300 passengers on board because the energy density simply isn't high enough for batteries or hydrogen.
Mm-hmm. So, but hydrogen is also a possibility, perhaps not in long haul, but in short haul?
There's things that are on the drawing board. We haven't done much with it, but some Boeing, Airbus, others are starting to work on it. But again, the challenge is hydrogen is 1/3 the density of jet fuel. So you need 3 times the weight on board the airplane. So it's hard to see that really displacing most of what we think of as commercial aviation service, though it could work for short haul and for specific kinds of missions.
Mm-hmm. So what are some other technologies? Are there any other things out there that an airline like United can be working on?
Well, look, we have to own up to the fact that our big source of emissions is um, jet fuel, carbon coming out the back of engines, and those are likely to stay powered with jet fuel as far as the eye can see. But so that what that means is sustainable fuels, finding ways to create jet fuel from sustainable sources instead of from oil out of the ground. Point one, and point two, when you can't do that, is to use direct air capture and sequestration. Ultimately, get to a world for every molecule of carbon dioxide that comes out the back, we put a molecule of carbon dioxide back into the ground for permanent storage. And finally, is innovation. This isn't just for aviation, but across the board, this is not a problem that we're going to solve without a lot of innovation. But it's also a great opportunity. This can be our generation's moonshot moment to create new technology that goes far beyond just the impact of carbon, but has benefits that we haven't even anticipated yet.
Now, I believe your pledge is to be net carbon emissions by 2050. Is that correct?
Yeah, and we've said 100% green, which we differentiate from net zero because we're not going to use traditional carbon offsets. We're going to get there by either lowering the amount of carbon that we emit, but for every molecule of carbon that we emit, we put one back into the ground.
Are there any policies that you expect that you need from Washington to make that a reality?
Yeah, look, this isn't just about United Airlines, but the only way we as a globe are going to solve this is a coordinated effort. It's going to require government support, both incentives and sticks, carrots and sticks, but also support for the investment required to do the R&D to drive the cost curve down on many of these new technologies, which aren't just for aviation, but across the board are going to be needed to get us to net zero for the whole economy.
All right. Well, Scott, I'm sorry that our time is up, but I'm so glad that we had a chance to talk about some of these issues. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Joanne.
All right. Well, now I'd like to kick things over to Axios co-founder and CEO, Jim Vandehei. Jim?
Thank you very much, Joanne. It's now my pleasure to bring you a conversation with Andrew McDonald, who's the SVP of Mobility and Business Operations at Uber. Andrew comes to us from Toronto, Canada. How are you doing?
Great. Good to be here with you today, Jim.
Excellent. So let us, before we get into the specifics, talk a little bit about Uber at this moment. Most of us obviously use Uber. The vast majority of us to order a car and to get from point A to point B. Amid the pandemic, people are moving around less. They're more worried about being in enclosed spaces. What is the state of Uber?
Yeah, 2020 for Uber, like a lot of companies, was a tumultuous year. We started off with pretty bold ambitions to take the company to profitability, good trajectory on our mobility business and our delivery business. The pandemic hit in late March for most of our markets, early April. Our business dropped off a cliff on the mobility side. On the delivery side, we saw a boom, and we've been running with that boom ever since. And it's sort of been a slow crawl back for the mobility business. We did our best through the depths of the pandemic to keep cities moving, move essential workers, provide support for frontline employees and hospitals, provide meals for those in need, and provide support to our earners. And we're really optimistic about 2021. What we've seen through 2020 as cities have come out of lockdown, as we've come on the back end of waves, the businesses come back really, really quickly. People are eager to get out. They're eager to socialize. And while it's early days, I think we're pretty optimistic about the vaccine progress we're seeing in some of our largest markets like the US and the UK. And as those places open up, we'll be there to help the cities move again.
Climate change is obviously the backdrop of the conversation that we're having. Most of the activity for Uber is cars moving people or food or other people from point A to point B. Cars emit pollution. How do you think about that? How can Uber be a part of the solution, and over what time frame, and what are the pieces that it takes to be able to get to a point where your vehicles, your force is emitting no emissions?
The world's at an interesting moment right now, right? With the pandemic, I think top of mind for everyone is going back to normal. I think we'd all love to go back to normal. But what's clear to us is that pre-pandemic normal, as far as transportation goes in the world dealing with climate change, just wasn't working. It wasn't good enough. I mean, in our largest markets around the world, the Bay Area, Brazil, Australia, these places were literally on fire as a result of extreme climate events pre-pandemic. And so, Uber views this as an opportunity coming out of the pandemic to fundamentally change our go-forward approach on climate. We think we have a really large role to play in the electrification of transportation. We've gone out with some pretty bold commitments. As you'll recall, we committed to be 100% battery electric vehicles by 2030 in the US, Canada, and Europe, and to do that globally by 2040. These are bold ambitions. These are hard ambitions. These are going to make us really uncomfortable and make us have to invest a lot of resources and make some hard choices. But we think as the world's largest mobility platform, we have a responsibility to do that. And we think we can accelerate the world's transition to battery electric, to emission-free in a few different ways. One is we have large rider base, hundreds of millions of people that use the service to move around their cities every year. We're offering green options. We've expanded our Uber Green product to more than 1,500 cities and towns, places as large as San Francisco or Chicago, but also small towns around the world. This gives people the choice, consumers the choice to take a ride in a battery electric or hybrid vehicle. And we use the money generated from those trips to put more dollars into drivers' pockets who are choosing these vehicles, and also help fund some of our internal initiatives as it relates to electrifying. On the driver side, we've committed $800 million by 2025 to help drivers convert from gas-powered cars to electric cars. So that should really accelerate things. On the platform side, we've invested in micromobility, so electric bikes and scooters, as well as integration with public transit agencies. And then finally, and I think a first for the industry, we've committed to be transparent about all these efforts. We are going to publish data regularly on our progress, whether it's good or bad, and we're going to expect the public to hold us accountable.
If I'm an Uber driver and I want to become a green driver, so I want to get an electric vehicle so I can drive my passengers or food around, it's obviously more expensive. There's fewer options. Is there anything Uber does right now for me? And if not, at what point would I get that additional cash to be able to help offset the cost?
So there's a lot we have in flight today for drivers who want to convert to battery electric vehicles, and it varies a little bit by market. I think one key point to recognize is that no single company, no single government is going to drive this change to emission-free vehicles. And so we're building a network of partners. We've got great partnerships with folks like General Motors, with Renault Nissan, with charging networks like EVgo, and different players around the world. And what we're trying to do with those partners is secure best-in-class deals that we can pass along those benefits to drivers. And so we want you to be able to get the best price for an electric vehicle from General Motors, and we think we're able to do that today. So as a driver who wants to make the conversion, we'll give you a lead for discounted vehicles. If you're not sure you want to go all the way, we've got partnerships with rental car companies. For instance, with Avis, you're now able to rent an electric vehicle in a few cities in the US, including Los Angeles, so you can try it out and use that on the platform. And then, different sorts of initiatives like that. And I mentioned the sort of tilting the economics in favor of drivers to make that cost of ownership work. So in the US, for example, every trip done on a battery electric vehicle, the drivers paid an extra dollar fee for that. So that comes from us. And we're doing that to try to sort of bring that total cost of ownership to a competitive place with gas-powered vehicles to accelerate the transition.
As we wrap, you made a big pledge. It's really dependent not just on Uber, though, right? If you don't have car manufacturers producing the cars or cities creating the infrastructure or the right federal and state laws, it'd be almost impossible to pull this off. When you think about the government part of it, like what is the most important piece that government can do to help companies like Uber be able to make good on these pledges?
There's a ton that government can do to accelerate, Uber's efforts on the electrification front and the industry's efforts. And we talked about these in our climate report. A couple key ones One, bringing down the cost for battery electric vehicles, anything we can do to bring that cost of ownership down. And that's about the cost of the vehicle itself. Maybe there's incentive programs, those types of things, but also making sure that charging is affordable and accessible, and making sure that it's charging distribution in cities is equitable. When you think about where chargers tend to be in cities today, often those are wealthier neighborhoods, office buildings, et cetera. When we look at our driver base, they live all over cities, and they often live in areas that are underserved by some traditional services. And so we want to make sure that drivers have access to charging, and that it's not just in wealthier areas of cities or for wealthier people who've got an electric vehicle as their second or third car. We also think governments need to encourage the use of micromobility, bikes, scooters, these types of things. They take people out of cars and they help them move around cities more sustainably. We'd like governments to help us partner with transit agencies. Transit agencies are going to be cash strapped coming out of this pandemic, and there's a lot we can do to not only move more people onto transit from the Uber platform, but bring down costs. And then finally, we think road pricing is a critical part of taking cars off roads. And we think it should be road pricing for all vehicles, not targeted at certain segments or sectors. Put a price on using the road for all consumers. And I think you'll get things done more efficiently.
It's a big project. It'll be fun to watch. Andrew, thank you for a fascinating conversation.
Thanks for having me today, Jim. Cheers.
Excellent. Over to you, Joanne.
All right, thanks, Jim. Our final guest today is the Chief Sustainability Officer for General Motors, Dane Parker. Dane is coming to us from his home in Detroit. Dane, welcome.
Thank you, Joanne. Grateful to be here.
Well, we're happy to talk with you. Boy, GM made some really huge news recently. You announced the intention to phase out gasoline-powered cars and trucks and to produce only zero-emission tailpipe vehicles by 2035, which is huge news. But I will say there was a little bit of head scratching. Some people said, well, what does it mean, their intention to do that? So why don't you explain to us exactly what this statement means?
Sure. So we actually announced two related things. We announced our commitment to be carbon neutral by 2040. And obviously for us, one of the most important elements of that is tailpipe emissions. And so we announced our aspiration to be in a position to eliminate all tailpipe emissions from our light duty vehicle fleet by 2035. And so for us, that's the most important step we can take on our journey to be carbon neutral. And it aligns with what we see in terms of our products and the technology and the investment we're making. And so we felt now is a great time to make that stretch.
Well, it certainly aligns with the agenda of the new president, the Biden administration. They've talked a lot about clean transportation, green transportation. But just a year ago, GM was on the other side. You were siding with the Trump administration on an illegal battle with the state of California, which was trying to put in some stronger fuel economy regulations at the time that the Trump administration was basically putting a freeze on some tougher rules. So my question is GM just rolling with the political winds?
So I think sometimes when announcements like this come out, it's easy to see them as a single point in time, when the reality is this has been a work in progress for a while. And I've directly been involved myself for well over a year in doing the work we needed to do internally to be prepared for a change like this. And so this is something that we've done with inputs from investors, from customers, looking at our own technology and looking at all of the different policy frameworks around the world. And this was for us a great time to launch something that we've been working on for quite a while.
I've been around in the auto industry for a long time. So I do remember back about a decade ago, the Obama administration was pushing a lot of green car agendas, but it didn't seem to go very far. Why now? Why is now the right time to do this?
Joan, I think that's one of the best questions we can ask, because we are at what I believe is an inflection point. And there's an alignment of the technology and the maturity of the technology, the understanding of customers and the willingness of customers to embrace something new, and the understanding and support of policymakers around the world. And that convergence, I think, is really unique. And it's an opportunity for us to accelerate something that maybe in pieces in the past, various pieces of that weren't ready. And I think they're ready today. And so this really will be a true inflection point in the transportation industry.
What policies do you think that you need in order to achieve this goal? There are various ways you can incentivize or use a hammer to get people to move in this direction. What policies do you want to see?
Sure. So I think the most important ones are those that will enable consumers. So things like the EV tax credits and the extension of those credits so that it's an incentive for consumers to participate. And then support for things like infrastructure, whether that's the manufacturing infrastructure or it's the charging infrastructure. And those can be incentives or they can be policy support, for example, multi-unit dwelling charging infrastructure related policies or codes, things that will help this be seamless for customers as they move forward. And then finally, I think continued support of research and development. We know that there's a lot of progress that's been made on batteries and there's more that needs to be made. And so incentives that encourage the research and development of those technologies, I think, will be important as well.
Well, certainly right now, electric vehicles tend to be more expensive than a gasoline-powered car. And sure, you're not putting gas in every week, but are we at the point where it's cost parity, where I can buy a car for the same price I would for a gasoline car?
Yeah, I think just to answer that question is a little bit of a function of the time horizon. So if you're looking at owning a car, for the useful life of that car, absolutely today, you'll be better off buying an electric vehicle. The challenge we have in front of us is we want that to be upfront even, because a lot of times people may not calculate in the lifetime fuel costs and maintenance costs and service costs. And so the goal is to get them to cost parity in day one and improve upon that. So for customers, it becomes an even easier decision.
And do you think we're close to that point?
I think we are, yeah, with the Ultium battery technology that we're working on today and things that we already know are coming, we see significant improvements in power density and in cost so that we can close that gap in the near future and really make it that much easier for consumers when we have the product they want at a price that they've been accustomed to paying for an ICE vehicle. It really takes all of the guesswork away from their decision.
Yeah, I think that's been sort of a misalignment that the EVs, have been relatively either too expensive or too small to suit my needs. So I think people want a larger vehicle they can pile all their kids and stuff in, and it can be electric as well. And do you have anything on the horizon that will fit that shopping list?
We do, in fact. As you hinted at, we started on the small end with the Chevy Bolt almost 4 years ago, which is just now being refreshed, and then adding the Bolt EUV, which is a little bigger for those who want smaller crossovers. And then later this year, we'll have the Hummer EV, which is on the big end of the spectrum. And close on the heels of that will be the Cadillac Lyriq, which is a good-sized, a larger crossover. And then in the next 5 years, we'll have 30 total products across virtually every one of those categories that consumers want today. They'll be able to choose an EV in that category.
Well, then the big question is, what am I going to do about charging it, right? Right now, we go to the gas station once a week or so. Are we all going to have to pay to have chargers put in our garages? And what do you do about the people like yourself even? I think you live in an apartment. You can't run a cord out the window in an urban area. So how do we solve this problem?
Yeah, that's an important question, and you're right. I learned that firsthand. So those that have garages, the answer, we're we're coming out with in the announcement of this Bolt EUV, which is for customers that buy the Bolt EUV, we will pay to put a level 2 charger in their garage. So it's not even something they have to worry about. And we know about 80% or more of charging happens in the home. And so that's a great enabler. But to your point, for those who can't do that, is where I think the public and the policy support's going to be very important. And some of that will be the conversion of traditional gas stations to electric vehicle charging stations. But there are other great models like our partnership with EVgo, where we're adding thousands of charging stations in places that are convenient for people's everyday lives, whether that's retail environments they come to or places they would stop on long road trips, but to give them options so that you don't have to have a garage to have an EV.
But then my next question is about the grid, and what we've seen in Texas this past week really gives you pause about whether the grid is available and worthy of supporting all of these electric vehicles.
Yeah, certainly with what's happened and the variety of causes of that are things that we need to look deeply at. And the good news is there are solutions. And in fact, with EVs and a proliferation of EVs, people with bidirectional charging actually could have a backup power source in their own home, so that if the grid does go down, you actually could operate critical things in your house with your EV. And so that gives some resiliency to the grid. And then certainly things like storage, energy storage, as we transition to more renewables, then those intermittent sources are going to need things like batteries or hydrogen as a backup so that we can bring that same stability that people need. So I think it's a great opportunity for us, and EVs can actually contribute positively to that.
And we just have a little bit of time left, about 30 seconds. I'm curious, this pandemic has really soured people on the idea of shared transportation, public transit, and people are buying more cars and they're traveling alone. Here you sell cars, but really, if you're the chief sustainability officer, you know that shared transportation is important. How do we get people to feel positively about that again?
I think that will turn fairly quickly, because you're absolutely right. There was the health scare around that changed some people's minds. I think as that technology gets more visible, which will happen very quickly, and people experience it, and we get comfortable with vaccines and how we interact with each other, then the importance of ride sharing and shared transportation will come back. And I think autonomous has a very bright future for all those reasons you mentioned.
Okay, well, there's a lot happening. Dane, Parker, we really appreciate you joining us today at Axios. So thank you again for being here.
Thank you, Joanne, for the questions.
And I want to thank our audience for joining us today for another virtual conversation to make you smarter, faster. And I want to thank Uber for being the sponsor today and making this conversation possible. If you'd like to sign up for my newsletter on transportation, it's called Axios Navigate. You can do so at the Axios website, axios.com. And one more thing, we have a new series called Get Smart Vaccines, which is 5 short videos to bring you up to speed on the vaccine rollout. You can find it at axios.com, Get Smart Vaccines. Thanks again for joining us.
Herd immunity,
DNA, RNA, mRNA,
distribution.
it's really important to understand how vaccines work.